At 2:17 on the 14th of November 2004, for British SBS operators lay beneath a rotting fishing pier in Port Ration, a southern coastal city in the Kingdom of Darsan. Oil drifted over black water above their faces. Less than 40 meters inland, a warehouse officially registered for frozen fish exports was running one of the most dangerous bomb logistics cells on the coast. For weeks, coalition reports had linked a new wave of shaped charge attacks to material moving through the port, but no one had been able to prove where the devices were being assembled. American surveillance had narrowed the district. MI6 had narrowed the building. The SBS had narrowed the door dot before sunrise. That hidden network would be broken. 2 foreign bomb specialists would be killed at their benches. A shipping broker who financed the operation would be captured alive. Hard drives, coded shipping seals, ledgers, and machined copper liners would be hauled out under fire. One SBS operator would take a chest wound and still remain conscious through extraction. By dawn, the CIA liaison assigned to the Coastal Task Group would be staring at the summary and asking the question nobody in the room could avoid. How had 16 men done in 43 minutes what months of surveillance had not finished? The answer began with the nature of Port Ration itself. It was not a battlefield in the conventional sense. It was a port where war hid inside customs paperwork, dock labor, refrigeration units, and shell companies. The state had not fully collapsed. That made it worse. Officials still wore uniforms. Inspections still happened. Cargo still passed through registered channels, but real power sat with militia brokers, port fixers, shipping families, corrupt clerks, and the armed men who decided which containers would be opened and which would move untouched into the interior. The Americans had attacked the problem with scale. Satellites watched shipping lanes. Drones tracked movement through the southern districts. Analysts compared manifests, fuel deliveries, generator loads, and vehicle traffic. The architecture was impressive. It built a broad picture of smuggling and insurgent sustainment, but it still could not answer the most important question in time. Which building? Which room? Which night? MI6 worked from a different premise. In places like Darsan, technology could expose patterns, but only people could expose intent. A local source, recruited quietly through a chain of debts and family pressure, reported that an unprofitable bonded warehouse in the Old Salt District was receiving late-night deliveries unrelated to fish exports. Guards were being paid unusually well. Fuel consumption was too high. One dock worker saw a crate split open during unloading and glimpsed machined copper cones wrapped in wax paper. That detail changed everything. Copper cones meant shaped charges. Shaped charges meant armor killers. Within hours, British command approved a direct action option. The target sat in a militia-controlled district with no clean helicopter landing zone, no room for a convoy, and no realistic chance of a large assault remaining covert. If a broad coalition force moved in, the site would be stripped before the outer cordon even closed. The British chose the opposite approach. A small raid. Civilian vehicles. Water access. No noise until the last possible second. That was why the SBS took it. They did not need to own the entire district. They needed the right building, the right room, and one narrow window before the city woke up. For 23 days, the same target was studied by 2 systems that saw war differently. The American side looked from above. The British looked from inside the pattern. CIA traffic analysts and maritime intelligence officers built an excellent macro picture. At 0:40, the SBS assault force gathered inside a disused refrigeration yard 12 kilometers inland. The briefing was short and clinical. Routes, timings, sectors, casualty order, evidence priorities, extraction triggers. No speeches, no drama. The mission depended on precision, not emotion. Each man carried a suppressed carbine set for close work, a sidearm, breaching charges, restraints, trauma gear, and enough ammunition to survive the first fight without resupply. The 2 exploitation specialists carried hardened laptops, evidence sleeves, thermal shears, and cameras for rapid technical collection. One medic packed extra chest decompression kits because the troop Sergeant expected ricochet-heavy contact in a steel-walled environment. The assault force would move in 3 civilian trucks that belonged in the Port District at that hour. One looked like a fishmeal delivery truck. One was marked for diesel servicing. One carried municipal drain maintenance signs. Their paperwork was good enough to survive casual attention, but the plan did not rely on deception once eyes were closed. Disguise was only meant to buy the final approach. At 1:31, the convoy rolled toward the coast. The route took them through dim customs lanes, fuel storage roads, and one stretch of open industrial access where the Americans wanted tighter overhead coverage. The British kept that coverage distant. The port listened for helicopter noise and noticed anything unusual in the sky. Silence mattered more than reassurance. At 2:06, the force dismounted behind a broken ice depot 200 meters from the warehouse. The smell of salt, diesel, and rotting fish hit first, then the strange layered quiet of a district that was never asleep, only watchful. 8 operators moved toward the eastern net alley. 4 shifted low toward the rear wall breach point. 4 stayed offset to block the access lane and break any external response. The entire plan rested on a 4-minute human habit. At 2:13, the Eastern Guard stepped from his post, lit a cigarette, and moved toward the runoff wall, exactly as observed. At 2:14, the rear service corridor lit briefly from inside. Someone crossed carrying a metal tray. At 2:15, the 2-yard cats passed through the shadows. At 2:16, the lead breacher pressed a palm against the steel rear door and felt the vibration of active machinery behind it. Nobody needed to say anything. Weeks of surveillance had reduced the target to muscle memory. The troop commander checked his watch once. If the timing was right, the strategic heart of the entire operation was less than 2 meters beyond that door. If it was wrong, 16 men were about to fight inside a militia-controlled coastal block with almost no room to maneuver. At 2:17, the window opened. The first kill was silent. The smoking guard never completed his turn. One SBS operator took him from behind near the runoff wall and lowered the body without a splash. A second guard caught movement too late and died from a suppressed shot before he could raise an alarm. Then the breaching charge fired. It was small, almost insultingly small by American standards, but it had been cut for exactly that steel thickness. The rear service door folded inward. 2 flash devices went low. The entry team was through before the second blast finished echoing. Inside, the corridor was narrower and hotter than expected. A machine technician turned with a pistol and died where he stood. The lead pair broke left toward the workroom. The second pair drove straight into the machine hall. The third pair covered the cross passage. Close quarters battle in a steel-lined port warehouse is not cinematic elegance. It is sparks, dust, muzzle flashes, metal fragments, and decisions made in half seconds. The first room fell fast. A press operator was shot beside a workbench stacked with copper liners. Another man trying to run the inner door with a handheld radio was cut down before he reached the handle. The left assault pair hit the accounting alcove almost exactly where surveillance predicted it would be. Ledgers, hard drives, shipping tags. A heavy-set broker reaching under his desk for a pistol. He died. The financier beside him froze and was forced face down to the floor, wrists cinched before he understood what had happened. Then internal resistance formed. A disciplined guard deeper in the corridor fired a burst through partition sheeting and hit one SBS operator high in the chest. The plate stopped the first impact. Another round slipped under the arm into soft tissue. He dropped behind crate stacks but remained conscious. The medic crossed under fire, sealed the wound, checked his airway, and pushed him clear of the doorway. The assault never paused. The inner machine room was barricaded. The breacher ignored the lock and hit the hinge side with a directional charge. Smoke and insulation dust blew outward. 2 men entered through the gap and found the strategic core of the target. Shaped charge liners in multiple calibers, penetrator molds, explosive sleeves, wiring harnesses, gauges, and to foreign specialists. One tried to burn documents in a solvent tray and died before the flame took. The second came up with a carbine and was shot at less than 4 meters. Outside, the district was waking. Militiamen spilled from the front side of the compound into the yard. That was where the blocking team won the raid. For SBS operators in work jackets and headscarves held the lane with short, exact fire that made the assault force seem larger than it was. A pickup trying to nose into the yard crashed into net racks after its driver was hit. A gunman reached for the warehouse machine gun and was shot before he could swing it. Inside, exploitation had already begun while shots still cracked outside. Hard drives into dry bags, shipping seals into sleeves, photos of the bench layout, ledgers ripped from the desk. The wounded operator was still breathing. The financier was still alive. The room was theirs. From breach to strategic control, the decisive part of the raid lasted barely over a minute and a half. By 2:19, the objective was secure. Not the district, not even the whole compound. The objective. That distinction explained almost everything about what happened next. The British had not come to clear blocks or trade fire with every militia fighter in Port Ration. They had come to seize the workshop, kill the specialists, capture the broker, strip the records, and leave before mass-corrected surprise. Once that had been done, every second spent inside the yard became wasted risk. Extraction began in the order fixed during briefing: casualty, prisoner, evidence, then guns. The wounded SBS operator was moved half-seated, still conscious, blood soaking through the dressing under his arm. The captured financier stumbled between 2 operators, hands bound behind him, his face pressed low. One intelligence collector carried hard drives and coded seals in a waterproof bag. Another dragged ledgers and manifests from the accounting alcove while bullets snapped through steel pillars overhead. The blocking team peeled back by pairs. One group fired. The second moved. Then the roles reversed. Their discipline prevented the fight from becoming a static gun battle, which would have killed the mission. The militia in the yard were firing hard by then, but they were reacting to a raid that had already achieved its real purpose. They were defending a corpse dot at 2:20. The first truck pulled away. By 2:21, all 3 vehicles were moving through the industrial roads, leaving behind gunfire, confusion, and a compound that no longer mattered as much as the evidence already in British hands. Port Ration was fully awake now. Men were shouting across alleys. Radios were alive. Trucks were starting. But the decisive act had happened before most of them knew there had been a breach. The first American rotary package launched at 2:24. By conventional standards, that response was fast. By the logic of this mission, it was already late. When the helicopters were airborne, the SBS were no longer fighting for the room. They were already clear of the district dot at 3:05. The convoy reached a British forward site inland. The wounded operator went under surgical lights within minutes. He survived. The financier, now identified as Samir Halwan, was separated for immediate exploitation. The 2 dead foreign specialists were photographed and processed. The workshop materials were catalogued. The hard drives were opened before sunrise. What emerged over the next hours justified every risk. The shipping seals linked fake customs flows to real Port Authority channels. The ledgers exposed payments to militia handlers, dock officials, mechanics, and 2 compromised inspectors. Component traces tied the workshop to shape charge attacks across 3 provinces. One address from the seized records generated a follow on target by the next night. The raid had lasted minutes. Its consequences moved for days. At 7:20. CIA Liaison Commander Matthew Rees stood in the British operations room reading the preliminary summary while a satellite image of Port Ration glowed on a nearby screen. The image showed the district clearly: roads, warehouses, fuel yards, piers. It also showed the limit of his own system. The Americans had seen the port. The British had touched the thing that mattered. That was the professional lesson left behind by the raid. Technology had not failed. Satellites, drone coverage, traffic analysis, and maritime pattern mapping had all helped narrow the problem, but they had not solved it. What solved it was a chain of human decisions made at close range, an MI6 source noticing a crate, surveillance teams reading habits in a dirty yard, an SBS troop commander deciding that one rear room mattered more than the whole compound, and 16 men willing to enter before dawn in civilian trucks because waiting for perfect certainty would save the target. The contrast between the institutions was never cleanly ideological. The CIA station had built the broader architecture of the smuggling network. MI6 had found the hinge. The Americans sought confidence through volume. The British sought action through specificity. One asked how the entire maritime pipeline functioned. The other asked which clerk, which warehouse, which door, which minute. The raid broke more than a single workshop. Over the following weeks, attacks using the most sophisticated shaped charges in the southern corridor declined sharply. The network did not vanish. Men adapted. Routes shifted. But the port ration line had been severed at a critical point. More damaging still, the illusion of invisibility was gone. A militia-protected coastal workshop, hidden inside normal trade, had been entered, stripped, and neutralized before the district understood what was happening. The SBS team returned to maritime operations with almost no ceremony. The wounded operator recovered. The dead were few enough to avoid headlines. That, too, was part of the truth. Operations like this rarely become public legends when they happen. They become professional reference points among the people who understand what they required. Years later, Rees would describe the raid in the simplest possible terms. The Americans had built a machine to observe the coast. The British had used that machine only until it brought them close enough for human judgment to take over. After that, war became what it has always been at the sharpest edge: a door, a room, a burst of violence, and the speed to leave with the answer. At 2:17, port ration looked ordinary. Nets, diesel, seawater, dim lights, guards half awake at their posts. Before sunrise, one of the most dangerous hidden bomb networks on the coast had been broken by a force small enough to disappear back into the city it had just cut open. That was not myth. It was simply what happens when intelligence stops being a picture and becomes contact.